the Chinese Communist Party, which, interestingly enough, because Nancy Pelosi first came to my attention when she started crying out about the Tiananmen Square massacre, and yet apparently her conscience had a price.
Bringing up China, since you brought it up, a lot of Americans right now, well, especially the mainstream media, industrial complex, and liberal media, they're so fixated on Russia, Russia, Russia. And in my opinion, Russia isn't our greatest threat right now. That's actually China, because Russia's more becoming like a failed state. It's going to become a big Iran eventually. But China, on the other hand, has the second largest economy on Earth. They have the largest population on Earth, and they have the largest army on Earth. And not only that, but they already surpassed our Navy size. They have a larger Navy than the U.S. right now. And right now we're so fixated on Russia, but yet here we have China, right, a rising superpower that's wanting to dominate the world and replace the U.S. What would be your approach in tackling China if you're in Congress? Like, what would be your idea? What would you like to see on addressing China? Because it is going to be a huge threat in the next couple of years.
100%. Well, I would say look at 2019 and COVID. Thank you, Wuhan lab of, virology. Even though they tried to suppress that information. The only thing I might slightly disagree with you about is that I think this Ukrainian war situation, and we can tackle that, or my thoughts on that later if you like, but is that Russia is showing that single-handedly they're outproducing the entire West in munitions and military hardware right now. And so if we think we're prepared for any kind of military engagement with China and with China's industrial base, in World War II, I think I'd heard recently that in 1938 or 1939, the U.S. had an army that was actually smaller than Belgium. But then we did this mass industrialization, mass mobilization, and ramped up. Do you see the wherewithal right now for something like that, especially when we're having drag queens doing recruitment videos?
That's a huge concern right there.
Yeah. I mean, when people are less concerned about meritocracy and DEI, when you're in the foxhole, you just want to know that your buddy sitting there next to you who's got your back is competent. I don't think you really care what their color of skin is. In fact, I think that actually probably the institution that was the most non-racially biased ever was the U.S. military, because you worried about success, which was meaning staying alive and killing the enemy.
Yeah, winning wars.
Yeah. So it's funny because we keep talking about election interference from outsiders and, the whole Russia gate and the conspiracy about, Trump being a Putin, puppet, which tell me how Vladimir Putin wanted President Trump to be elected when Hillary Clinton actually sold him uranium-1, so a quarter of our nation's uranium holdings when she was Secretary of State, and was actively recruiting for the Skolkovo Initiative, which is their military version of the Silicon Valley. She literally was recruiting U.S. companies to go raise money and bring technology transfers over to Russia. So the idea that Putin preferred Trump, who actually held his feet to the fire, and actually took, the Wagner Group, the mercenary unit that they have, which is kind of their equivalent of what we had with Blackwater. Well, people don't talk about this, but there were Wagner troops that were actually approaching U.S. positions in Syria, and they were annihilated. And it never got reported in the West. But if you listen to Russian sources, it sounded like President Trump actually took out 300 to 400 Wagner troops. So the person who actually stood up to Putin and backed him down, because as I like to, the only president in the 21st century who hasn't had Russia invade a neighboring country has been Trump, because George W. Bush saw Georgia. You saw under Barack Obama the Crimea, and then now it's Ukraine and the Donbass region. But China is such an existential threat. In fact, they have this theory. It was a book, a doctrine written by a couple of their, I think they were colonels, they may have been generals, I don't know. But it's called Unrestricted Warfare. And so they look at cyber, they look at economic, and then kinetic is kind of the last resort. So if you look at what they've done inculcating our institutions over here, with the Confucius Institutes and, the the contracts that they have, the Sequoia Capitals who are seeding money to all these Congress people, the people who are being taken on these junkets over to China. And look, I again, I mentioned earlier in there that, I'm a follower of the truth because that's what my Lord and Savior commands me to do. Let's stop playing games. This current occupant of the White House is a controlled asset.
Yeah.
Now, he may not be taking orders directly from Xi, but he clearly was compromised.
Oh, yeah, he is
He
compromised.
took money from the CEFC China Energy, which is owned and operated by the CCP.
Yeah.
I mean, it boggles the mind. So what I would do is I would say that we would need to have a real house cleaning with regard to all China influence.
Yep.
There were some investigations that were being done regarding Chinese influence peddling, and I'd say it's not even influence peddling; it's just flat out co-opting. And then all of a sudden, Sequoia Capital started sprinkling some money around the Republicans as well, and all of a sudden that committee just kind of drifted off that topic. But I think President Trump understands exactly what's going on there. I think he actually had the CCP on their knees.
Yes.
And because their economy is a lot more fragile than people understand. How many empty cities can you continue building?
Yeah,
and look, they're energy dependent. I mean, they use like 18% of the world's energy, but they only produce 4%. They're relying on exports. Well, look, if all of a sudden we start bringing back our pharmaceutical industries, which we need to reform some there as well.
We definitely need to reform
but
it.
bring our manufacturing, because like when I mentioned about how we had this mass mobilization right before World War II, we're in a much different situation now. We're a service industry now. We have offshored all of our manufacturing for the most part, and that's got to be reversed, both for the well-being, the national security of the country, and frankly, because those are good those jobs are good-paying jobs that, you know what, if I have to pay $150 or $200 extra for my flat-screen TV, but I know it's employing, 3,500 people in Dayton or Tallahassee, I mean, look, sign me up. I'd rather see us manufacturing our own stuff and being self-reliant.
Yeah, no, I agree that we need to bring American jobs here, and that's what President Trump actually campaigned hard, and he's still campaigning to making sure that America's put first, because for a long time we have outsourced millions and millions of jobs, manufacturing jobs, to these countries such as China, India, Southeast Asia, even Central America. And it's hurt the Midwest. It's hurt American jobs here in the U.S. And next thing you know, you see decay. You see decay in American streets. I mean, the infrastructure is horrible. People's, morals and, performance when it comes to work and productivity is just down. And America's put last, and yet we keep funding countries such as China that really don't have the best interests for the U.S.
I mean, look at Larry Fink, BlackRock, Blackstone, all the different, venture capital funds that are literally taking money from pension funds, from people's retirement accounts, their 401ks, and they're funneling it over to China. And what's China doing? They're ramping up their military specifically. So if we end up going to war with China, I would like those people to know that they personally finance the military that we're getting ready to face.
Yeah.
And how many of those people think, or do you think it's going to be their sons and daughters to go off and fight and die? I don't think so. So the situation, you hear, and I'm trying to think of it, but it's there's a name for it, but it's the theory about there's a rising power and a descending power. But the difference, I think, that's never been envisioned before is that you've never had a power that was trying to stave off the ascending power that literally had their ruling oligarchs trying to sell them out and profit by managing the decline of the country. But that's 100% what we've done.
Yeah, no, that's true. And the Chinese right now, they're stealing our technology. They're stealing our secrets. They're using all of the economic, benefits that the U.S. provides and using it, like you said, to build up their military.
Right.
But one thing that they're also doing is they are poisoning our youth, and they're poisoning America with all of this woke garbage.
Yeah, and fentanyl.
Yeah, fentanyl.
Yeah, where do you think that comes from? It doesn't come from the Mexican I mean, it may come through the Mexican cartels,
but it's all CCP related.
Right.
And the funny thing is, the Chinese, they have a whole century called the Century of Humiliation.
Right,
It was
with
the
the Opium
1800s.
Wars. Yeah.
Opium Wars. What did the British do? They had several Opium Wars because they wanted to make sure that the Chinese were basically dependent on the British, and the British were like, "Hey, you
Moral
want to, yeah,
decay and
moral
dependency
decay."
and drug addicted. Yeah.
The Chinese are doing that to the West now,
Yeah. Seems
and
that they learned from history.
they learn from history, and that's I mean that's what they want to do. They want to replace the West, but they're using TikTok, they're using social media, they're using drugs, they're weakening the U.S. from within, and they're corrupting the minds of millions of young Americans and politicians as well,
Right.
saying America's systematically racist. What happened in 2020? You had Black Lives Matter burn, loot, and murder many cities across the U.S. What did the Chinese foreign minister say? He said, "We condemn racism and we condemn the oppression that the U.S. has had for several centuries." They love all this woke stuff,
Yeah.
all of this woke stuff, and I guess my question is, wokeness, of course, has unfortunately taken over America's culture, and of course, the Chinese play a huge role in that. What would you like to envision Congress do? Of course, it's a big, complex situation, but
Right.
I mean, because you got critical race theory, you got gender theory ideology that's spreading across every single school library. And actually, we're gonna show you an article from 4 or 5 SD in a minute.
Oh joy.
But yeah, that's gonna be interesting. But what would you like Congress to do, or what do you envision